The doctor took 2 more drags in the cigarette, then pushed the sink faucet's handle to the left and stuck his free hand into the stream of water. Raising it up, he sprayed 74 with the water droplets by flicking his fingers at him, and then extinguished the cigarette under the flow of water. After turning off the faucet, Dr. Ward touched the soggy tip that had been lit seconds earlier. Following his lead, 74 touched the same spot and held it there for a full 15 seconds before lowering his hand. Marco was watching all of this with a confused look on his face. Finally, curiosity got the best of him, and he asked, "What is he doing?" Dr. Ward looked at him with overly apparent joy. "It's learning." To further prove his point, he walked over to Marco's desk, ripped off half of a sheet of paper from a legal pad sitting next to the cigarettes, twisted it into something roughly the size and shape of a pencil, and stuck one end of it into the flame. He passed the non-lit end to 74, manually closing the patient's fingers around it, watching it burn down silently, drawing closer and closer to 74's hand. When it was close enough that he was sure to feel the heat, Dr. Ward turned on the faucet. He turned to Marco with self-assuring pride as 74 pushed the paper under the running water, and the flame went out with a faint sizzle. Marco, finally grasping the concept, whispered, "There's no fucking way." But there was, and it was happening. While Marco lit a cigarette from the pack he was regretting having left on his desk, the doctor was engrossing himself with 74, who had taken to wandering around aimlessly, but eventually winding towards the far wall where Dr. Ward had a series of shelves that housed various chemicals, in boxes, bottles, bags, and all sorts of different containers. 74 took some notice of the shelves, but appeared oblivious of the chemicals, until a fortuitous loss of balance sent him reeling into the shelf and a glass bottle crashing to the floor. Dr. Ward knew by this smell and the location on the shelf where 15 or so identical bottles sat. The label amongst the shards of glass read, "Diethyl ether." He had to laugh when 74 staggered from the intoxicating vapors. The doctor soon went from amused to amazed, though, as 74 stepped back from the puddle, then approached it again after a good 20 seconds, fell to his knees, pressed his face on the floor, and began breathing deeply and rapidly. In and out, in and out. Marco was just as surprised. So surprised, in fact, that all he could manage was, "Is he?" before trailing off. Dr. Ward finished Marco's question as well as answered it. "Huffing ether?" "Precisely." The situation was changing as rapidly as 74 was learning. After his discovery of ether, 74's hand fell onto the neck of what was left of the glass bottle, which had smashed more or less into the shape of a beer bottle shank used in all the Hollywood bar fights. The air seemed to fill with tension, and no mistake could be made regarding 74's new intentions as he walked toward Marco with his ether bottle blade raised and ready to cut. There was no logic behind the change, except for the possibility that the drug had switched gears on him. Logic was the least of Marco's worries, though, as 74 drew near Marco's main concern was survival. Fortunately for Marco, the first thing that came to mind was to flick his lit cigarette at 74's face to slow him down, or at the very least distract him. What Marco did not expect was what happened next. As the ember hit 74 right square between the eyes, the highly flammable ether engulfed its face in flames. As he threw his hands to his face, they too ignited from the ether, while the broken glass bottle crashed to the floor and shattered. Both Marco and the doctor watched stunned as 74 ran to the faucet, slapped the handle, and used his hands to throw water on his face, putting both out. Then he turned unfazed, this time eyeing Dr. Ward. "Holy shit," Marco screamed. Dr. Ward, though overwhelmed at what had just taken place, kept his cool long enough to calmly approach his equipment table and wield his razor-sharp scalpel, wearing a fiendishly morbid expression. "I think this experiment's gone far enough," he said, walking toward 74 with the blade raised. "Wouldn't you say?" Marco ignored this obvious question, saying, "I wasn't expecting him to light up like that. Damn." "I wasn't expecting him to put it out like that." No sooner had Dr. Ward finished saying that, calm and collected as ever, he lunged, aiming his blade for 74's jugular. He made strong contact, but instead of the sinking feeling he was expecting, the blade sunk into something hard and solid. Dr. Ward had missed the vital target and only took a small gouge out of 74's jaw. Without pause, Dr. Ward took another swipe, this time determined to stick between the enemy's ribs. But the blade never met flesh. 74 caught the doctor's wrist mid-swing. and Dr. Ward's free hand balled into a fist and blasted his mindless attacker's cheekbone with force enough to nearly break his fingers. Still, it was not enough to deter 74. With unexpected strength, 74 bent his adversary's arm back until the scalpel clattered to the ground. Dr. Ward screamed, more from rage than pain, and wound back his fist for a second punch. This one fell solid, dead center on the nose. He felt a popping beneath his fist, and 74 staggered back as a fountain of blood poured down his freshly broken nose. For good measure, Dr. Ward sent his knee into the stomach of the monstrosity. He succeeded in dropping 74 to the ground, but in doing so brought his foe's hand close enough to the scalpel to scoop it up. And now, rearmed and posing a significant risk, 74 sent Dr. Ward and Marco retreating into the corner. Dr. Ward commanded Marco to stay there while he slid Marco's desk over, barricading his assistant behind it. Although Dr. Ward was not a particularly scrupulous man, he would sooner place himself in danger than his hired help. With Marco successfully blocked into the corner, Dr. Ward grabbed Marco's wooden desk chair in both hands, leapt atop the desk, and raised his chair above his head, ready to smash it over 74's head in a flying leap as soon as he was given the opportunity. 74 seemed to pick up on this and kept a safe distance from the doctor, pacing back and forth aimlessly. It appeared to Dr. Ward that a stalemate had been reached. Unfortunately, appearances are often deceptive. The standoff lasted for 10 horribly long, drawn-out minutes. Beads of sweat were forming on Dr. Ward's forehead, and the stress on Marco was so great that 2 minutes into the showdown, he bent over the desktop, opened the top drawer, and polished off the rest of his flask. For the final 8, he returned to the corner in a crouch, hugging his knees and rocking gently back and forth. 74 made the first move to break their locked game of cat and mouse. He disappeared behind one of the metal shelves that stored chemicals and returned moments later with a brown glass 1-liter bottle clenched in his right hand and 4 more of the same type held between his stomach and left arm. The scalpel still held tightly in his left hand. Dr. Ward barely had time to yell, "Fuck! Ether!" before 74 threw them all in rapid succession at the walls around the desk, and Dr. Ward cringed and raised his arm against the spray of glass and solvent as the 5 resounding crashes of incoming bottles broke. A scent like that of paint thinner filled the air with sickening pungency, making the lungs feel like they had been coated in a layer of water. Just as the dizzying intoxication set in, the ringing of the ears, blurred vision, and diminished motor function, Dr. Ward's eyes fell on the flame of the Bunsen burner just a few yards away. It would be only a matter of seconds before the massive quantities of the volatile liquid filled enough airspace with its vapors that a cloud of it would touch the flame, and that would spell the end of both him and Marco. The doctor leapt towards it, but inevitably lost his balance, landing hard on his stomach. He hated leaving Marco to fend for himself as he was doing, but he had a bigger crisis to stop. He rose to his feet, ripping off his lab coat and ether-soaked shirt as he ran, and closed the burner's gas valve with little time to spare. He spun around in a haze from ether inhalation and screamed. Marco had lost consciousness while attempting to climb over the desk, and was at that moment being turned face up by 74. Dr. Ward made a mad dash to save Marco, but by the time his knee slammed into 74's head, the scalpel had already been in and out of Marco twice. And had he not been attacked, 74 would have made yet another deep wound in the young man's belly. The enraged doctor kicked 74 twice across the eyes after knocking him to the ground before he received a small cut on his ankle from 74's blind swipes. Then turning, he hoisted Marco onto his shoulders and staggered, still ether high, into his small personal office. After locking the door and lying Marco on the desk, he collapsed to the ground overwhelmed. His assistant was suffering from possibly life-threatening injuries. He was trapped in his office, and to top it all off, his 6-shot .38 revolver was in the drawer of the desk in the library, which sat directly opposite his office, across the 100-foot length of the lab he had just locked himself out of. He was out of options. Dr. Ward lay there feeling defeated until his eyes fell upon the enormous cage in the corner of the office. Inside of it lay Angel, his pit bull, somehow fast asleep despite all of the commotion. He flashed a manic grin. She was the answer. She was his way out. "Angel," he said, and her ears perked up, but she remained asleep. "Angel!" he yelled, and she leapt up in her cage, her tail wagging and body jerking with excitement. "Who's a good girl?" She dropped the front of her chest down to the ground in a playful bow. "You want to go play?" "Yeah, come on, let's go play," he said, flinging open the cage.